Given that I would be spending a good while outside for the next few months, I figured that I would need something to keep my gamer brain entertained while the normies have their normal people parties and get themselves wasted while listening to a generic YouTube electronic music playlist blasting on some overcompensatingly big speakers. And what better way to entertain myself than with one of those JPEG slot machines that are all the rage right now. It's just as well that I've recently covered Phantasy Star, because this one is related to that. Supposedly. IDOLA Phantasy Star Saga is a brand new mobile game developed by SEGA, and as the name implies, it's part of the Phantasy Star Saga. Or at least it claims to be. It's hard to tell, and I don't just mean it doesn't resemble the classic Phantasy Star games. I mean that it barely resembles the online games too. In fact, it only seems to be related to Phantasy Star Online 2 because of some item designs and a few characters and races that resemble some of PSO2's own. Like this lady over here, whose race is called Demonic, but clearly looks like one of those sexy ass demons. The gist of the story is that there's this guy called Ulysses, or Yui for short. A young man with a curious mind and a kind heart who lost his parents when he was a little boy. He meets a girl with a comically oversized helmet. The girl, called Stella, is part of an independent group called the Aries Knights, who are chasing after an idola. You know, the thing in the title. Idolas are the spawn of Dark Falls, a name that should be familiar to any fans of Phantasy Star. Long story short, Dark Falls is an ancient evil that was sealed away 20 years ago. Defeating it completely was out of the question, so instead Dark Falls was split into 3 parts: its magic power, its spirit, and its will. However, a group of jerks calling themselves the Liberation Army are going around trying to unleash Dark Falls' power once more. They are led by a man named Masala, who is accompanied by a young boy. And this weak little pansy is all that remains of Dark Falls, so maybe it would be better to stick a sword through his head. To be honest, the main story is kind of mediocre. Too many scenes are used as war dumps or as an obvious excuse to have another battle. The actual world building though is fairly interesting. Some characters are called Zodiarts. Zodiarts are associated with one of the 12 signs of the Zodiac, and have the power to transform into that sign's particular idola. For example, Stella's sign is Aries, the White Ram, and can transform into, well, Aries, a giant lady that steps on people. I'm sure this is someone's fetish. The people of Idola are somewhat divided by 2 alignments, Law and Chaos. And I was happy to see that, despite some of the character designs clearly pointing to Law being holy knights and Chaos being edgy bastards, it's really not as simple as a good versus evil conflict. Law and Chaos are ways of life more than anything else. Law characters follow the, law of the Kingdom of Veolia, and aspire to uphold justice and order above all else. Even if this means being dickheads to those less fortunate or those who oppose their standards. Don't be mistaken, many Law characters are good people, but there are examples of Law characters being just as bad, if not worse, than the ones they proclaim to be evil doers. Chaos characters are the opposite of Law, in that they value freedom and free will above all else. Naturally, this is a breeding ground for thieves and other assholes, but some who prefer chaos simply do it because they would rather be free of the shackles of society. Both sides also gain their powers from 2 different sources. Law characters use magic stones called runes, which not only grant them power, but are also useful for a whole lot of everyday applications. Chaos characters paint themselves with special tattoos called fasts, somewhere on their bodies. Sometimes in very interesting places. A select few, like Yui, instead have a neutral alignment, being neither Law nor Chaos. So who better to guide and lead a ragtag group of knights and thieves who keep bickering with each other? And man, this game makes a nice first impression. Right off the bat, you get blasted with its production values, at least compared to most mobile games I've played. Characters get large detailed sprites in combat, and some of these backgrounds are just beautiful. The animations themselves are, well, they're the standard kind of awkward twinning sort of animation, but they do their job for the most part. The dialogue screen isn't quite as nice, but it does get its share of pretty backgrounds and static CGs. The only thing I have a problem with is something that's a rampant problem in most games of this kind, and that's the fact that a billion different artists worked on it, so you get an inconsistent mess every time multiple characters are on screen. Besides that, the overall style is nice. The whole Space and Stars motif is just great. This also includes the soundtrack, and boy oh boy was I surprised. The entire soundtrack is amazing, mixing heroic orchestral tracks with some relaxed, spacey kind of music. You know, the ambient ones with pianos and bells as the lead instruments. The battle system is fairly interesting too. At its core, it's a turn-based JRPG, but what separates it from other games is the focus on elemental attributes and the two-party setup. Every single character has an elemental attribute. This attribute can be fire, water, wind, or earth. In typical video game fashion, fire beats wind, wind beats water, and water beats fire. Earth is the odd one out, being weak against itself. During combat, each attribute also has a counter, which increases by attacking and defeating enemies up to a maximum of 10 points. Characters have one basic attack skill that can be used regardless of how many attribute points they have, but typically they get stronger variations as the attribute points increase. Yui, for example, goes from 1 strike to 2 strikes to 3 strikes as he reaches 3 and 5 attribute points. The other 2 regular skills require a certain amount of attribute points to even be usable, and after that you can't use them again for a certain number of turns. This doesn't expand the attribute points, so even if you have 4 characters of the same element, they can theoretically all use their skills on the same turn, and these skills are very diverse. There is your standard damage dealing and recovery sort of move, but then you have moves that alter or are altered by the character's current attribute points, or moves that require special effects to be in play to deal the most damage, or moves that buff other character's stats. But every character also has a special skill, the Elemental Blast. These powerful skills use the attribute points you build up during combat, but since the attribute points are shared between characters of the same elemental attribute, you have to choose whether you want to reset your points and be limited to weaker skills, or to hold back and leave your regular skills on cooldown while you unleash an Elemental Blast. In short, the basic flow of combat goes like this. The character uses its basic attack, then moves to the second skill, then the third skill, and finally the Elemental Blast. By earning experience points and leveling up, regular skills increase in level, but Elemental Blasts must be upgraded separately, which costs some more money and some materials. Levels are also limited by the character's rarity. 3-star characters go up to level 40, 4 stars go up to level 60, 5 stars go up to level 80, and 6 stars can reach the maximum level cap of 100. You can increase their rarity by spending some rarity stars, which can be annoyingly rare as well and leave you with characters who can't level up and thus are just wasting experience points. Thankfully though, the game has been getting more generous in the past few months and they aren't quite as hard to get as before. In the character upgrade screen, you can also spend experience books to increase a character's experience points, or fuse up to 4 copies of the same character to increase their limit break, which is basically just a stat boost. And yes, if you spend tons of money on this game, you will have stronger characters than someone who doesn't, but I'll get to that later. Characters also gain affection points as you use them in combat, because of course throwing them into dangerous situations makes them more friendly towards you. As you reach each affection rank, you unlock their biography quests, dealing with their personal situations. And I'm not sure if it was a smart choice to not separate these stories completely from the main storyline. See, even though you can roll antagonists, and their interactions in the menu screens point to them being under the player's control, when you go through their stories, they act just like they do in the main storyline. That is, they oppose the player's party. I get that this is kind of hard to avoid without making every enemy flip sides to justify it, but well, it's still a weird thing. Either way, the last biography quest performs a thing called fate divergence. This is a turning point in their lives, and for practically every character this means choosing between War or Chaos alignment, regardless of what their current alignment is. This comes with a new appearance, and can also mean having the character's personality change drastically. It also changes their skills, though not always quite as drastically. Sometimes they get a different status effect or a small buff, while sometimes they can even be replaced with completely new ones. The new elemental blasts are the real highlight here. But of course, that's not all. Due to plot reasons, characters with the War or Chaos alignment can only be placed on the War or Chaos party, each consisting of up to 4 characters. Neutral characters like Yui can be placed in both, but they are far and few in between. And it's because of the possible changes brought by the fate divergence system that you seriously have to think about your choices. I mean, yeah, your favorite character might look super sexy in Chaos with those questionable tattoos, but would her skills be better used in the wall party instead? And sometimes both choices are worse, like when the cute fox girl cuts off her hair because story reasons. And let's face it, long hair is better than short hair. Which brings me to the main annoyance I have with the fate divergence system, and that is the fact that some designs for one of the alignments just look several times better than the others. But obviously this is meant to be a big decision that alters the character's destiny and beliefs and all that, so I can't really fault the developers for that. Anyway, during combat you can also switch between the two parties. This is called Reverse Rush and can be charged up to 3 stages, each increasing the damage that the entering party will do. Switching in the wall party also reduces the damage dealt by the enemy during that turn, while switching in the Chaos party will reduce the enemy's defense. You also have to consider the symbols equipped to each slot. There are 2 types of symbols, Weapon and Soul. You can just think of them as accessories, since they both provide a constant stat boost and a variety of special properties. These can be things like increasing the power of healing moves, or increasing the power of attacks that target a single enemy, or triggering a special effect if the character's HP is dropped to a certain point. And make no mistake, while the vast majority of battles can be overcome by just enabling auto-battle and grinding harder, a handful will absolutely wreck your ass if you don't pay enough attention. Like these stupid goddamn lizards, Jesus fuck. Weapon symbols take the shape of weapons. Every symbol has its own fixed stats that increase with every upgrade, which is done using fragments of that same symbol and a bit of money. Each time you upgrade them, however, the weapon symbol gets a randomly selected stat boost. Soul symbols are made from emotions, thoughts and things that the characters have experienced during their stories. Just like weapon symbols, they provide stats and properties, and can be upgraded by spending fragments and money. Besides fighting regular enemies, a few quests will put your party up against an IDOLA. You're not really expected to straight up win these story quests, and they end once you deal enough damage, but it's a different story when your party transforms into an IDOLA too. As I've mentioned earlier, some characters are Zodiarcs and have the power to transform into their zodiac sign's unique IDOLA through a process called idolification. Although it's honestly kind of ambiguous why being a Zodiac even matters, given that apparently anyone can turn into an IDOLA. Those that don't have any zodiac powers in particular just transform into Chameleon, the village bicycle of IDOLAs, but some of them do gain the ability to transform into others once you get them up to 5 stars. Depending on the base stats of the characters used to transform, your IDOLA is given a ranking depending on how powerful it is. IDOLAs also have 3 parts, the main body and 2 appendages. You only have to destroy the main body, but bringing the appendages down can stun and leave them vulnerable for a turn. The game launched with a mode simply called IDOLA Battle, which is sort of an indirect player versus player kind of thing. Every player summons an IDOLA and everyone else gets to fight it. You start with the weakest ones, of course, but as your rank increases, you get to fight stronger ones, which naturally gives you better loot. It's basically just a thing you set up and then check upon a few hours later. You don't really have to do anything besides setting up the idolification process. The other half of the IDOLA battle competition is actually fighting other people's idolas. These are picked at random, based on your current rank, and selecting one lets you battle it for 8 turns. Your objective is to defeat them, or at least deal as much damage as you can. The more damage you deal, the more rank experience you get, and I'm assuming you get more goodies too. At least I'd hope so. At the end of each week, every player gets some rewards based on their ranking. These include fragments of rare symbols and a special currency that can be exchanged for rare materials. Your rank also gets downgraded 1 level and the weekly ranking is reset. Fighting in IDOLA battle also awards you with IDOLA score, which can be transferred and used in Phantasy Star Online too. More recently, the arena was added. This is another semi-competitive mode where 2 parties fight against each other to earn arena coins, which can then be spent on the arena gacha to roll all sorts of goodies, including 5-star characters. At the beginning, you pick from players that are weaker, about the same level, or stronger than your party. Then you pick a card, which grants a random buff or debuff to your attribute points. These battles are fought in sets of 3, with an increasingly bigger arena coin bonus for each stage. However, you can't change the difficulty until you leave the current set. Besides these, you have your run-of-the-mill events where you grind resources and use them to buy materials and other things. There is also a weekly rotation of daily grinding quests that give you money, resources or experience books. Pretty standard stuff really. If you've played any free-to-play game of this kind, you know how it goes, for better or for worse. You have daily challenges to win some premium currencies so that you can spend them on rolling characters and hope that the RNG gods aren't feeling bitter at that moment. And that's kind of the thing with these games, and IDOLA isn't any different. It's par for the course, but I still have to talk crap about it because that's kind of what I do. In typical gacha hell fashion, higher rarity characters are stronger, so anyone who spends tons of money to buy premium pebbles is likely going to have a much easier time with everything. I mean, yeah, lower rarity characters are easier to limit break, but when you have enough money or luck, it kind of stops being a factor. Secondly, even if you want to keep playing the game, at one point you're going to run out of the arbitrary energy resource and have to wait until it recovers. Although this has been greatly improved with the existence of potions that restore your stamina and IDOLA battle points. In fact, I'm getting flooded with them right now. In case you are wondering, stamina recovers at 1 point every 3 minutes, while IDOLA battle points recover at 1 point every 30 minutes. The arena is different, however, in that you can only fight 6 battles every day. Another influence of being one of those fancy live service things is the fact that you get events based on holidays like Christmas and Valentine's Day. The pressure felt from the need to save the world is immediately destroyed when everyone is too busy stealing each other's chocolates and playing with snowmen. Again, this is something that's to be expected, but you know, critical analysis and all that. One thing that I wasn't expecting though was the fact that this game apparently hates my shady Chinese phone and randomly returns me to the dashboard or just stays on a loading screen forever. I've seen a handful of reports about this problem on Twitter and online message boards, but this doesn't seem to be a widespread issue and the official site doesn't mention it. It's been several months and patches since then and it doesn't seem like it's ever getting fixed. It was kind of annoying for actually playing the game and I can't count how many stamina points I've lost during the first month. After that, I decided that I had enough of playing it on my shady Chinese phone, so I installed a shady Chinese Android emulator instead. Since then I haven't had much problems besides a crash or two. Maybe you won't have problems with the game, but I think it's important to at least mention this. Finally, there's the thing that Sega screwed up the hardest. Even though the promotional material claimed that IDOLA was a return to the series' roots, it's really not, aside from the fact that it's a turn-based RPG and has more fantasy than space and robotics. The subtitle Phantasy Star Saga was likely picked for marketing reasons, and I can't help but feel like Sega shot itself on the proverbial foot. Surprising absolutely nobody, the reception to the initial reveal wasn't very positive. As it turns out, calling a game X and then delivering Y gets people frustrated. It seems to be doing decently, but if they called this game just IDOLA, it probably wouldn't have gotten the backlash. Hell, even the connections to Phantasy Star Online 2 are flimsy at best and the developers read Wikipedia tier at worst. Several of its items are used as symbols, but everyone just wears fantasy clothes and attacks with iron swords and magic, not futuristic laser blades and pointy energy knuckles. Yeah, you have the robots that totally aren't just casts, but the humanoids are as standard fantasy fare as you can get. Aside from the obvious demon demonic thing, you also have Kuna and Chene as guest characters providing a dose of idols and tits. But that's where the connection ends. And really, it's not a bad game. The soundtrack is awesome, the combat system had a lot of work put into it, and while the story is blah, the setting has potential. But in the end, I think that even if the game was a masterpiece, fans of the Phantasy Star series would still be disappointed because it's Phantasy Star in name only. Maybe if it wasn't riding on the name, nobody would have paid attention to it, but I don't know. Regardless, if you're looking for classic Phantasy Star, you're going to be sorely disappointed. But if you want a distraction to play between train rides or something, well, IDOLA isn't a bad choice. So boy oh boy, let's all hope that an English release doesn't end up like Phantasy Star Online 2 did, am I oh wait, Microsoft just went and announced it out of nowhere, so I can't even make the joke I wanted to at first. Holy fuck!